All right, everyone. Hello, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Jason Levine, Principal Worldwide Evangelist for Adobe, focusing on digital video and audio in the Creative Cloud. And for the next 20 minutes or so, we're going to be talking about some of the latest innovations, features coming to the next update of Premiere Pro CC. So we're going to start by talking about the Lumetri color panel and some of the changes that we've made there. Now, we've done a lot of work on Lumetri over the last couple of versions. And the first thing I'm going to show you here is something that many of you have been asking for, which is simply the ability to layer multiple levels of Lumetri from within the panel. So you've always been able to add multiple Lumetri color effects on a clip, but the process previously was that you had to do this via the effects controls panel, where you'd have literally multiple instances of that effect there. And as you start twirling things down and working inside the effect, it gets very confusing. And this really just wasn't an elegant way to work, and it forced you to really leave that sort of grading color experience. So now, from within Lumetri at the top here, just under our global effects bypass, you'll see that we now have layers. So the first layer in this case of Lumetri, I have applied an Alexa LUT. So again, I can just disable this quickly so you can see the original flat content. Here's the input LUT applied. And then we could make additional changes to this. I've got another layer here that I now want to do some additional selective color grading on with some of our new curves that I'm going to show you momentarily. But in addition to that, I could also do things just like do some basic warming up here, perhaps increase the contrast a bit, maybe drop our shadows, maybe add a little bit of vibrance while I'm at it, and some faded film. And then again, each of these layers can be independently enabled or disabled. So I could go back to the Alexa LUT and disable that and only see what it looks like with those additional corrections. Back to Alexa, this one here, disable that. You get the idea. I can create new layers, add another Lumetri color effect. Again, I can rename that, color V3, and now very quickly stack and have multiple revisions of my grading over time here in this kind of layer stack very, very easily without ever having to go to the effects controls panel. So a much more elegant way to access Lumetri. And you're also going to find in this latest release that, again, had you done this previously, you started to take a bit of a performance hit after really 2 or 3. Here, personally, I've done up to around 7 or 8 different layers of Lumetri now done in this new sort of cascading layer style. The performance is really quite stellar and very, very fast and very, very immediate. And I think you'll feel that as well. Okay, so that's just a little bit on layering Lumetri color. Now, what I want to show you now is based around a new feature that we have called Selective Grading. You may have seen some of this in some of our marketing over the last few days. And what this allows you to do is specifically target different hues, different color ranges, different Luma values, and individually adjust saturation or luminance or even the hue itself right on screen very easily with a whole new series of curves. Now, previously, under our curves section, we had the hue saturation wheel, which I'm sure many of you have seen before, kind of non-standard. And this was really just the way to adjust saturation across multiple hues. Some people liked it, many did not. It was very non-standard. And if you were coming from a grading environment, it just didn't feel right. And additionally, you were stuck and confined to this one sort of circle. So it was very difficult to do multiple grades inside of a single hue sat wheel. So part of what we wanted to redo with these new curves was really a design challenge. It's taking something that you know is a more standard kind of interface. So you can see the new scopes here: hue versus sat, hue versus hue, hue versus Luma, Luma versus sat, and saturation versus saturation, displayed horizontally. But we also just wanted to give you more control, more visual indicators for newcomers, people new to grading, to visually understand really what's happening to your content. So let's start with hue versus saturation, which, by the way, if you had done anything in a previous version of Premiere with that hue saturation wheel, all of that will be compatible with this next version. It will all translate into the hue versus sat curve. All right. So let's focus on doing a couple of quick changes here, specifically maybe brightening up her skin tones and perhaps the blue background. So I'm going to take the familiar Adobe eyedropper here and find kind of a neutral skin tone on her face. And when I do that, immediately I'm presented with 3 control points, with the center being that initial touch point that I grabbed with the eyedropper. Now, I can freeform make adjustments here, or if I hold down the Shift key, I can constrain to this single hue. And as I begin to go north of the line here, you can see that I'm increasing the saturation of those skin tones. As I go south, I am desaturating that particular hue. But more importantly, and this is where, again, as a design challenge, this has really changed the way we understand and see these curves, because you'll notice that visually, it's showing me more saturated this way, less saturated this way. I can see with this vertical line exactly what's happening. You can add additional control points, you can widen the range, however you want to do this. It's extremely flexible. And again, we can come in here, let's take another sample on some of this sky. Same thing here. Again, adjust our blues, drop the blues ever so slightly, something like this. Widen the range really easily, before, after. Hue versus saturation, okay? Adjusting the saturation of a particular hue. Now, by the way, when we were talking about skin tone just a moment ago, on a traditional graph, this is what we'd be presented with, right? Right, dealing with reds, where it's kind of crossing the edges here. So you're kind of dealing with adjusting curves, like this, which, again, is more standard, but as a design concept, not so brilliant. So this is why we developed this little bar here, a slider, to allow you to pull those reds or any hue into visible range so that you're not having to cross the edges of the graph, okay? Reimagining, redesigning familiar curves and tools to give you more power and flexibility, all right? So that's a little bit on hue versus hue. Again, here's an example where we had, in this particular shot, you can see hue versus saturation. This green tarp was sort of very distracting. There's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of contrast in this shot, and your eye was sort of being drawn to that green. So we wanted to desaturate that. So again, eyedropper, took our sample. Here it is, overly saturated, right? Let's just desaturate that green and bring more focus to the center, to our subject here, all right? Real easily. And again, playback performance on these, particularly stellar, all right? Okay. So let's talk about hue versus hue. So now, the ability to modify an existing hue very quickly. So as we play through this clip, you'll see just about here that there's 2 girls here that have these kind of magenta colored shirts. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if we could adjust the dresses to that same color to give this shot, again, this more uniform sort of look. So with hue versus hue, same thing. I'm going to take that familiar Adobe eyedropper. I'll make a selection on the dresses. It finds it for us, but here's where this gets really cool. Now remember, with hue versus sat, our vertical line was showing more saturation north of the line, desaturation south of the line. Here now, with hue versus hue, it's showing you the hues that you'll be moving to. So if we go south of the line here, you can see it on the left side, I'm moving into the oranges, the yellows, the greens, or the magentas, the blues, the purples. So in this case, let me zoom back out. We want to find that similar magenta right about there. That looks pretty good. Play back. And again, we can enable or disable any of these modules. And you could also see, perhaps you're going to do a hue versus sat and maybe a hue versus luma, adjusting the luminance of a particular hue on one layer of Lumetri, but maybe you'll do hue versus hue changes on another layer, right? So not only can you enable, disable these in real time, but you can use that layering to really separate your grading passes and have very easy access to bypass or enable those different layers on your grades, okay? So a little bit on hue versus hue. Here's another example here. What do we do? Oh, we just kind of changed the headphone colors. We didn't like the blue there. Director wanted it slightly more purple, so did something like this. Again, there's your original. Okay. Maybe we could modify his skin tone as a little yellow here, so we could kind of push that more into a warmer tone if we wanted via hue versus hue. Okay? All right. So I'm going to show you one more of these before we have to move on. I wish I could show you all the curves, but you can see everything at the pods just behind me. So this one is leveraging hue versus Luma. So again, now we're adjusting the Luma value of a particular hue, which in this case we wanted to effectively darken, here's our original shot, the blues in the sky and in the reflection, just to create a bit more contrast, a bit more drama. Okay. So once again, all right, go ahead and enable this. Let's pull up right here to saturate there. Desaturate here. Let's grab this. And again, we can brighten up the hue value, or you can see my footage is starting to break down a little bit there. Or we can darken, okay? And once again, visually, as we go north, look, brighter, lighter. Oh, I get it. It's the luminance value of that hue. Darker, right? And you can see along the left. I love these visual indicators. If you had said to me prior to this, you need to use hue versus Luma to do something, I would have said, that's fantastic. Yes. What is that? Now you can see what it is. You can see what it is. There's so much visual indication. Reimagining curves for colorists, for beginning colorists, for color enthusiasts, for anyone who wants to make their videos look better. It's that simple. Can you feel my enthusiasm? Your silence says it all. Thank you, one person in the back. Continue to be silent, please. All right. Very good. So you have to check out these curves. They're really phenomenal. All right. Let's move on to data-driven graphics. Motion graphics templates. We're going to change my workspace as well. A lot of stuff with workspaces this time around. In this version 2, you're going to see us changing them and leveraging them constantly. Okay. So data-driven graphics were introduced in After Effects a little over a year ago, I guess. I'm kind of forgetting as frequently as we're constantly adding new revisions here. And effectively, a data-driven graphic allows you to feed an animation in After Effects via a CSV or TSV file. So in the case of this animation that we have here, which by the way is now contained in a MOGRT, a motion graphics template, you can see we've got some cool After Effects animation. And then it's showing us some values, recurring dreams, 44% of men, 83% of women, all right? Now, when we were talking to After Effects motion designers, there was this concept that, you know, data-driven animation actually can be used in many, many different ways. And a lot of times, once the animation is built, we just need to swap out that data. This is the perfect kind of workflow for an editor who's cutting similar content, but again, perhaps think of lower thirds, think of graphs and things. The data might change day to day, but the animation, the font, all the other elements remain the same. Why should the editor have to type in data or type in someone's name, possibly misspelling it, or change someone's role, getting it wrong? We would just like to feed it with a CSV file and let all the data auto-populate and let all the animation remain intact. So that's the concept of a data-driven graphic inside of a motion graphics template. Now, with our motion graphics templates, you have certain editable fields. In this case, just this one value, one angle adjust. But you'll notice that we have this new spreadsheet field here. So if we click on Edit Spreadsheet Data, I'm going to go to the Browse tab here, where I have a couple of CSV files that were given to me that will change the data here. Let's go ahead and click on Open. And when I do that, now you'll see that there are a whole new series of fields. It instantly updates on screen. Now, again, this came from the CSV, so I won't be able to manually edit these fields directly right here. However, if I go into the unmapped field, now I can type in whatever I want. So this can be at IBC, and I click OK there, and you can see it changes instantly. All right? So you can very easily swap out data from a CSV and continue to manually edit that. Okay? Now you may have noticed here that this particular motion graphics template, the designer was using hex values for the colors here. You don't have to do that. That's just the way they designed it. Again, any good graphic designer working in Photoshop, you're going to see those hex values inside the color picker. You probably know them by heart. I do not. So, but you can design these in any particular way. Now, This particular one here is where things start to get very cool, and I'm only going to touch upon some of this. Carl Soule will show you more of this later when he shows you After Effects. So here's a perfect example of where a data-driven motion graphics template can be absolutely essential for you as an editor, right? Lower thirds. That's actually the only motion graphics template that I tend to use, lower thirds. I want someone else to design them. I want someone else to choose the font for me. I just want them to look good. But the data will always change. Who's on screen will change. Their role will change. So here, someone created a spreadsheet and made a template that has different names and roles of the different people in our video. And you can see we have a slider here, again, as part of the motion graphics template built in After Effects, which allows us to very easily switch through and scrub through those different values. But again, this is all contained in the CSV. So if I simply wanted to swap all of this out, let's go to Browse. Let's go to a different lower third CSV. Immediately you can see the data swaps out there with all of our various names, okay? But you'll also notice that there's a couple of new things here. Or I should say, you may notice. I don't know if you're using motion graphics templates. If you're not, you should be. If you're not, you should check out Adobe Stock. Some are free. Someone I know sang about that once. Text controls, shadow controls, and a drop-down. What is this? Yes, so now in motion graphics templates designed in After Effects, as a motion designer, you now can give access to changing font, style, and faux styles and sizing within the motion graphics template. This is something that you cannot do today in motion graphics templates generated in After Effects for Premiere. In this next version, you will be able to. So they are now allowing me, the editor, to say, okay, I don't want active grotesque. I want to go to my typekit fonts or my favorites or anything else in my system, and swap those out and change the font and change the style or the size, whatever. You can set those parameters now directly in After Effects, okay? Super cool. The other thing I want to point out here about leveraging data-driven motion graphics templates is that this is actually reading CSV data live. What do I mean by that exactly? Well, in the case of like a broadcast organization, or even I tend to collaborate with people overseas who build these things for me. So we have shared content that lives on a shared server. If I'm importing this CSV from a server, and they're in Excel, for instance, and they're modifying the CSV, that's being fed live into Premiere. So when they save their changes, these values will update. That sounds really cool, except that if I'm like getting ready to finish and suddenly it says it's not Elliot Koppel, but it's someone else, and they're not an investor, they're a musician. So lock your CSV files if you don't want that to happen across the network. That's just a public service message for all of you. But just to emphasize that it is actually feeding live. Someone said yesterday we had a live stream there, and they said in the chat, oh, it's kind of like a dynamic link with CSV files. I wouldn't say that exactly, that's our branding, but yes, it kind of is. Right, Chris? Okay, cool. All right, data-driven graphics via motion graphics templates in Premiere Pro. Okay, two more things to show you here before my time is up. This next one, I'm very excited to talk to you about, not only as an audio person myself, but also just as someone who has been asking for this for quite some time. And that is simply, hold on, I'm just turning off rectified. By the way, quick show of hands, how many of you like the rectified half audio waveforms versus the full waveform? Who likes that half waveform look? Did you see what I did there just a minute ago? I'm asking you. You need to participate, by the way. That wasn't in the... So that's a rectified waveform. It's like you're seeing half. I don't like that look. This is, who likes this? Who likes the other one? Don't be shy, even though you know I don't like it. A few of you. Okay. What's wrong with you? No, I'm kidding. I find it very hard to see if I can't see the whole thing. All right. Sound. Noise reduction. We've had noise reduction for many, many years. With the integration of Audition, we had multiple types of noise reduction that you could implement. With the introduction of the Essential Sound panel, we gave you something called adaptive noise, which adapted to changes in noise over time. The problem is that when it began its adaptation of the noise, you had this sort of gating that was happening, where if you had something with noise, and you applied this adaptive noise, this is what it would sound like. And then everything would be quiet and awesome. The problem is if you had cuts in there, every time there was a cut, you'd hear because it had to adapt and learn every time. To that I say, not useful, friends. I know. We knew. We listened. So now we have a brand new denoiser. In the spirit of the Essential Sound Panel, you still have a single slider here at your disposal. So let's see if we can hear this. It's going to be very hard to hear noise happening. I'm not going to worry about you hearing the noise reduction. Here's what I want to point out to you. Let me go into my effects controls, wherever they are. Should be over here. Where are the effects controls docked? Where are they? This is now leveraging, just as with before, a new effect. Now what's awesome about this is, again, unlike the adaptive noise, we've really, the UI is even more simplified. So this is what we would call broadband noise on all frequencies. Now very typically, you have one of two types. You either have low-end, rumbly, humming, subsonic something or other, or you have high-end, wispy, hissy. They don't tend to exist together, but they can. So if they existed together, you might use something like this, which you can see is showing you an EQ curve where it's scooping out the middle. So it's not touching any of the vocal frequencies. It's only applying noise reduction at the low end and the high end, leaving the middle untouched. This is where you tend to get the most artifacts, right? So you have 5 very simple, visually easy to understand curves that will show you where it's applying the noise reduction. And then in the graph that you see here, when these pieces intersect, it's showing you actually where that noise is being removed. You've got a gain adjustment, an output noise option here. It's super simple. It requires even less noise reduction now to perform this operation brilliantly. It performs wonderfully in real time, and you don't have any more of that weird gating. Brand new denoiser. You're going to find this in Premiere and Audition as well. We also have, now this is going to be impossible to hear in here, so I'm going to show it to you and you can check it out at the pods where they can get a bit louder. Reduce reverb. Now UI-wise, this looks exactly the same as the denoiser. Same concepts here. You can choose the frequency range of where the reverb lives. But this is sort of the holy grail of audio asks, right? How do I remove echo, reverberation, excess room ambience? To be completely honest with you, this is not going to work for all things. No. What this is really great at doing is restoring a take that was virtually not usable. Case in point, the late, great Carrie Fisher shot some scenes for the next Star Wars movie, and maybe they only had some on-camera mic take of her saying, "Help me, Luke," or whatever she may say. But it was off mic, and it was noisy and echoing, and like, we can't use this. This is where the de-reverb really comes into play. Restoring something that was virtually unusable. Can you take something that's, the microphone is 100 feet away and there's so much echo and it removes all the echo and makes the voice sound like it's right in front of you? Maybe. Okay? Maybe. The key here is that this can restore echoey, reverberant, overly ambient takes, particularly from boom mics, room mics, and give you something that is usable. Okay? It's not going to create a brand new photo for you from something that was scratchy with no color or contrast, but it can restore things to being usable again. And it's the best one I've heard out there. There have been tons of reverb reduction plugins for years. This particular one that we licensed is really great. So I think you'll enjoy using this. Okay, very last thing I'm going to show you here, because I'm just about out of time. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Is VR 180 support, which you can see in full swing behind me at the pods. So you know that we've been working over the last couple of years to add support for 360 in VR. Now we support VR 180 stereoscopic. VR 180 by nature, by the way, is a stereoscopic format, including, of course, ambisonic sound. So here's my ambisonic soundtrack right here. This was captured with a Zcam Pro and a Zoom H2n in my backyard in Arizona, so not really much to see here. The really nice thing about this, by the way, if you're wondering why we're kind of seeing this in an anaglyph mode, that's because, again, being that 180 is by default in stereo, you have the option here, your VR view settings, to change your stereoscopic view into anaglyph. You don't have to edit that way. We could go into left or right and see the image as it was intended. By the way, this was also shot natively at 6K, so I'm using a proxy file which I built directly inside of Premiere just to make the performance, scrubbability, and editability of this even easier. The really nice thing about VR 180, though, is that the workflow and the way that you know how to use effects and apply effects in projection doesn't change. Right? You just have greater flexibility and compatibility with more headsets now that are supporting VR 180 stereoscopic. And you'll see some new options in some of our effects like VR projection, auto input. Again, we have all this auto detection capability. It already saw this as side by side, so we have the auto in and out selected here. Disparity adjustment. So again, if we're working with our stereoscopic anaglyph settings and we want to widen the stereo, this is particularly useful again if we have, I think I've got the projection effect. Oh yeah, so plane to sphere. So here I'm using text, okay, in this particular scene, and slide that in over there. And I want to make the, the text stereo a little wider. Obviously that was just created in Premiere, so you can adjust the stereo value of this directly on screen. So you'll just see some additional options in some of the existing formerly used on 360 effects, now leveraged on VR 180. It's just continuing our promise to add these new formats and new flavors to Premiere directly. And again, you can see this in practice. We've got some amazing, I think it's 8K VR 180 content at the pod just behind me here. Really cool, really, really amazing stuff. So, my friends, these are just some of the latest innovations in the newest version of Premiere Pro. Also worth pointing out, don't want to forget that we also have yet another request that you've been asking for quite some time right here. Yes, display color management. So you've been asking, I'm working on a P3 screen, on a Rec 709 screen, a 2020 screen. This will auto-detect the type of screen you're on and properly display it inside your program monitor based on that screen selection. It just works. Display color management, Luma tree layers, selective color grading with 5 new curves, VR 180 support, data-driven motion graphics templates, new de-reverb and denoiser, and that's just since April. And there's even more new format support and more in this latest version of Premiere Pro. So thank you so much for sticking with me. I'll be back in about an hour to talk about Audition. So until then, have a great rest of your day. We'll see you again next time. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.